Thank you, Simon, and thank you all for being here, and to the organizers for putting together another wonderful Maya weekend. So my research this past summer and possibly for the future dealt with the area around Piedras Negras, and Piedras Negras in Guatemala, of course, has had a long history of research here at the Penn Museum, starting with some of the early excavations and, of course, some breakthrough work in the hieroglyphs by Tatiana Praskurikov. And I'll be talking more about the region sort of surrounding Piedras Negras. So I'm working in the borderlands of the Piedras Negras city, urban area. And first, as archaeologists, we have to try to define this border and figure out, basically as Dave was kind of talking about just now, figure out what social groups these people belong to in the political landscape of the surrounding region. So this is a map of the sort of Western Maya lowlands in the late Classic, and the larger fonts sort of represent what some people might call primary centers, and this gets a little fuzzy, which sites are primary and which ones are secondary. But in the area of the Usumacinta River, which marks the modern border of Mexico and Guatemala, we have Piedras Negras a little further north and downstream from the next largest site in the region, Yaxchilan, which is further upstream to the south. And we do know from hieroglyphic inscriptions that Piedras Negras and Yaxchilan sometimes got along, sometimes pretended to get along, and most of the time did not get along. And we can use a lot of these inscriptions to kind of define these borders and who belonged where. Now, sort of an old school way of defining borders relies on making these polygons here, which again is pretty arbitrary depending on what you consider to be a primary center. And it also assumes that these centers basically have power until they come to the next center, and that these centers all pretty much have equal power. As you can see, these lines mark the halfway point between the two nearest cities. And this ignores topographic factors, it ignores, even much more complex cultural factors. But it's sort of a good guideline to get us kind of started talking about borders. And of course, these different centers, whoever ruled them, never had control over this entire landscape to the border. It's very spotty where their power was. But again, this does give us some idea. And what's interesting, I'll point out over here. I'll step away for a second. These 4 sites right here. Those 4 sites kind of do line up pretty well with that border, hypothetical border between Piedras Negras and Yaxchilan, and we do know that those 4 sites were mostly associated with Yaxchilan, and we know that. I'll get more into that with material culture and inscriptions. So the area that I'm focusing on in this talk in particular is the site called La Mar, which is located in Mexico on the western side of the Usumacinta River. It's probably about 15 miles west of Piedras Negras or so. And throughout its history, in the late Classic period, it was pretty much a vassal state to a number of different kingdoms, Palenque and Tonina at first, and then later Piedras Negras for much of the late Classic period. And here, of course, are nice pictures of these different sites. So we do have some information about La Mar from inscriptions that were produced locally at La Mar and probably commissioned partly by Piedras Negras and La Mar. And these show different rulers of La Mar. These are subsidiary rulers to Piedras Negras, often termed sahals in the Maya written inscriptions. A hau, of course, is the major ruler of a major polity, and a sahal is a subsidiary ruler. So we have here different sahals, and right here we have Khan there in the middle on this pretty elaborate stela from La Mar. And then here on the right we have another stela from La Mar from AD 759 in the Tuxtla Gutierrez Museum in Chiapas. At least part of it's there. And then on the far left we have someone we know probably the most about from La Mar named Parrot or Mo Chok. And this is a stela of his from La Mar showing him in a war with Pomona, and he's got a captive there. He's very proud of that. And we also have this same event recorded from Piedras Negras on Stela 12. And this shows ruler 7 of Piedras Negras above, smiting people, and to the left we have Parrot Chalk, the loyal Sahal, also there with the captives from Pomona beneath. And then Throne 1 is also another beautiful work of art from Piedras Negras, and this was possibly commissioned by Parrot Chalk of Lamar. He's actually named on this throne, even though he isn't really represented anywhere else. Pretty much when you see any representation of Ruler 7, any mention of him, you also see a mention of the Sahal, Parrot Chalk, on this beautiful throne here. Also on panel 3 of Piedras Negras, we have a mention of Parrot Chalk from Lamar, so this was commissioned by Ruler 7 of Piedras Negras, but it's recording an event further back in time. This is Ruler 4 sitting on his throne in the center, and he's actually kind of chastising the ruler of Yaxchilan, Yopat Balam II, and it's sort of a palace scene, and we see off to the far right, those two figures are represented as youths, one of whom is Parrot Chalk, and the other is a prince, probably the son of Ruler 4, Tuolchik. And this scene might represent that Parrot Chalk at an early date was viewed as a potential subsidiary ruler. But it's also possible we have to think that this was recorded by Ruler 7 later in time when Parrot Chalk was a ruler, and this could be a sort of way of saying he was here the whole time. It might not actually be a real event that we're seeing here, or the people represented might have been different. And then unfortunately, Tuolchik, the prince of Piedras Negras, is later shown on lintel 1 of La Pasadita, which is one of those 4 sites I showed you before that mark the border between Yaxchilan and Piedras Negras. La Pasadita was a vassal of Yaxchilan, and we see here that Tuolchik, the prince of Piedras Negras, has been captured by Bird Jaguar IV, and we don't really need to guess what happened to him after that. So anyway, getting to the actual archaeological evidence of how we define these boundaries, there are some differences between Piedras Negras and Yaxchilan that we see in their subsidiary states that seem to have spread throughout the polity. Mortuary practices is one. At Piedras Negras, burials are typically found in separate underground structures that sometimes have a little superstructure on top. And these are burials of rulers, and they typically have a pretty small amount of special grave goods that we would see in other sites. Whereas at Yaxchilan here, this I believe is Lady Shok's tomb. The tombs are typically underneath structures at Yaxchilan and are much higher in burial goods. Also, types of ceramics that we see at Piedras Negras, there's a certain type of technology called resist ceramics, which is a negative painting technique that we see at Piedras Negras and sites around Piedras Negras that were subsidiary to it that we don't see at Yaxchilan. Obsidian and Jade is another interesting thing that we see. We know that this is Pakal's mask from Palenque. We know that Palenque had access to jade, and we know that Yaxchilan also had access to jade and obsidian. Piedras Negras, however, being further downstream, has less jade in their burials, and also the obsidian that we see from Piedras Negras seems to have already been exhausted by the time it gets there. So we see possibly a restriction in trade from some of these other sites surrounding Piedras Negras. So now that we know that there was a border, that we've seen sort of these archaeological interpretations of the border and also the emic interpretations of some of the hieroglyphic inscriptions, we can get into the archaeology and try to understand this border. And this is a big question in my archaeology right now. What's the nature of interaction among these polities? Does Piedras Negras really have control of these areas around it, or is it just kind of saying that in the hieroglyphic inscriptions? So the area that we're looking at is in this red square here. So I'll be talking about these 5 sites here to the southwest of Piedras Negras: Lamar, Butzilha, Maracas, Nahuitz, and El Chuzo. So one suggestion, of course, is that these sites have to do with defense. And we saw this with those 4 sites that mark the border of Yaxchilan, that they seem to be sort of marking a border and having fortifications and trying to prevent people from moving into Yaxchilan from Piedras Negras. And so Lamar is located in a little valley here, and there's some mountains surrounding it. And I'll point to you right here on this map. There's kind of a hill place that I'm talking about. So this is the view from the hill looking over the valley. And we found in this hill, this looks a lot like what Sarah was showing us, which Charles Golden and Andrew Scherer have interpreted as a kind of fortification or even a sort of gate to try to prevent access into the site here. More evidence for fortifications we have from this site we call Maracas. It's on top of a hilltop, and it has this very large fortification kind of surrounding it. Another suggestion might be that these sites have to do with exchange and getting access to trade routes. This is from Busilha, one of the other sites, and right here we excavated a obsidian workshop and found just loads and loads of obsidian here in the stairway right here on the, I don't know what corner of the building it is. I think it's like the southern corner of the building. Right here, the lower right, we found a ton of obsidian throughout the building, but especially down there in the staircase. And it's possible that Busilha was sort of a center for exchange. It's actually on a hilltop, and in the wet season, it's basically an island. It gets surrounded by water. We practically had to swim to get there every day. So you can imagine people moving by canoes possibly during the wet season and making this a good spot for exchange for that reason. And then something else I want to also think about is that maybe these sites could be viewed as sort of sacred sites to the Maya, to the late classic Maya. We have evidence for that, having access to a sacred site here, which we call Navits. It's located on top of this hilltop. And at first we thought maybe it's sort of a military outpost with good view sheds and things like that. But when we actually started doing the archaeology there, we started finding more this altar and stela here, and this actually ended up being mostly a pre-classic site. So it seems that this site has a long history of people visiting it and performing rituals at the site. We have a cave here behind the main pyramidal structure there. Cave right beneath it, and we have a patio group there. And it seems that there's probably a lot more going on than just exchange and warfare here, that there were sacred sites that they were also visiting. So there's a lot more work to do, of course. We need to fill in some more gaps here around Yaxchilan there, and also as we move further southeast on the Mexico side of the border. And as we fill in more gaps, hopefully we'll get a better idea of the political interaction of the region. So thank you all again for having me here. I have no idea if I talked too long, but thank you.